So let me give you an example, and then we're going to actually have some folks locally model their own thinking in this in an issue campaign. So in 2009, there was a group of folks who were working to organize domestic workers in the state of New York. And domestic workers are folks who work in households, maybe as household staff, as caretakers, as house cleaners, and they are highly subjected to abuse. Lack of pay, overtime violations, threats of violence or intimidation, immigration intimidation, holding of documents and paperwork. And the domestic workers who had been organizing for a long time said, we need to change our reality. In fact, they said our problem statement was they're not protected by many laws and are vulnerable to exploitation and abuse largely because they're hidden in the home. And so the folks started coming together and saying, let's change this. We don't have to be subjected to exploitation and abuse. We can change our reality if we organize. So the National Domestic Workers Alliance said, let's figure out what some solutions could be. One of the solutions was we could run individual grievance campaigns against the most egregious individual employers. And so when there was a bad actor, we could go and protest outside of that person's home or make sure that that person paid back wages or overtime, but that's very worker specific. Number two was you could set up a fund for workers who have had their wages stolen to make sure that those folks get the money back, but that would not necessarily come from the employers themselves. The third was develop a public education campaign about the issue of domestic worker abuse. And the fourth was start a domestic worker counseling center and support group. And the fifth was pass a domestic workers bill of rights to provide overtime pay, protection from discrimination, notice of termination, and other basic benefits. So instead of just jumping to one solution, like let's just run grievance campaigns or let's just do public education or let's pass a bill, they said there are a lot of potential solutions to meet the needs of our membership. So let's actually think about those and then assess them against goal criteria. So this is a tool that you all can use as well, and it's something that we're going to practice in just a few moments. But some of the criteria, additional criteria you could use is results in measurable reductions in racial gender disparities, consistent with our values and vision, unifying, doesn't divide our potential allies. But here are the goal criteria they used. They took their possible solutions and then mapped those out across these key items. Will it actually improve people's lives? Pretty basic set measurement. The next was, is it specific and measurable? Can we actually know we've achieved this thing? The third was, is it winnable? Can we actually do this? And along what timeline would it be winnable? Is this a 20-year campaign to get to egregious actors, or is it a 5-year campaign or a 2-year campaign? And will it change power relationships? Meaning, will our workers have changed the dynamic where they have the ability to improve their lives? Also, will it build our organization? And sometimes people will balk at this one, and I just want to note, we say this, will it build our organization? Because when we build power, more power should be the outcome. If politics is about the improvement of people's lives, then as we build organization, more people, more volunteers, advocating for a more just world, that's a good thing. So does this build our organization, our allies, our money, our volunteer base? Great. And ultimately, does this excite us? So they use this goal criteria to try and map out across which solution they would choose. So here are the 5 solutions we talked about before. And let's think about improving people's lives. Grievance campaigns, setting up a fund for workers who had their wages stolen, public ed campaign, domestic worker counseling center, and domestic worker bill of rights. When they did this and went through improving people's lives, all but number 3 really would have direct, immediate impacts on people's lives, but you have to think about scale. For an individual grievance campaign, that's going after one individual employer, that might help one person. It will improve their lives, but it doesn't change structurally other people's lives. A public education campaign will be good and could maybe change the dynamics, but immediately doesn't improve people's lives. So as they were going through these solutions, they had to ask really tough questions. The second, is it specific and measurable? If you ran a grievance campaign, could you actually measure how much money was generated back to individuals? Yes. Same thing if there was a public fund to restore stolen wages. Yes. One that was not sure was the domestic worker bill of rights. Big question mark. Could we actually track how it improved people's lives? Winnable. They decided, when they did this criteria, that a grievance campaign actually wasn't winnable because there would be so many individual actors where there would have to be so many individual grievance campaigns that in fact it would never be winnable. It wouldn't structurally change the relationships. And so it would be responsive every single time. So they said, nope, that one doesn't actually meet the bar of winnable in this time frame because it's a never-ending fee. But same thing, there was a big question mark about the domestic Bill of Rights. Altering power relationships, you could see a lot of these actually didn't structurally change how workers were relating to their employers or the conditions in which they were advocating for their own agency. And here in Building Our Orgs and Exciting Us, there were a lot of question marks and open work. In looking at this, where do you think that the National Domestic Workers Alliance decided to focus their energy? Which number? You can show on your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I see 5. I see 2. Yeah, ultimately they decided to go with number 5. But they had a lot of options. And they did the thorough process of understanding what their problem was, the context of their problem, and then they chose a path forward. And they said, where we're going to go next is to pass a domestic Bill of Rights, and that means we're going to do some work in the legislature. And ultimately, that bill did pass into law.